Hey guys, Kyle here. So, just before the show starts, I wanted to mention our Patreon. You can pay us $1 a month as a thank you, as a tip. You can pay $2 a month to get access to one of our bonus content shows, episodes 2 days early, and a secret Discord chat where all of our Patreon donors get to go and hang out and talk with us directly. Then there's a $5 tier that you can donate to get access to a whole bunch more content. We have multiple bonus episodes on there. So please check it out. Patreon.com/itgetsweird. We don't advertise, we don't make money. So check it out and throw some money if you think that would be cool. Thanks. Welcome to It Gets Weird, our comedy show where we explore the unusual, the unbelievable, and the unexplained to try and make your world a little weirder. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Niall, and this week, Kyle, I want to make it clear, we're broadcasting at 440 hertz. We're not doing any of that 432 bullshit. We're not realigning your fucking spiritual wavelength or whatever. This is purely a 440 podcast because it is episode 440. Now, in episode 432, we did pitch shift it down by 8 cents.
Yes.
I don't know if that's clear to everybody, but it did happen. Go check that out.
Well, here's the thing. And this is what the 432 hertz brained people won't tell you, is that 440 hertz will accomplish the same shit that those people talk about, whatever that is. But 440 hertz, you spend enough time with it, you listen to enough podcasts at 440 hertz, you're gonna have better orgasms. Food's gonna taste better.
Yep.
I guess what I'm saying is 440 hertz is consciousness elevating, but also sort of like a bacchanalian sort of flavor of that same idea. So you're going to be listening to this podcast. You're going to be having the best nuts of your life. If you listen to this show, that fucking spaghetti you're making tonight, it's never tasted better until after
those noodles
you spent some
perfectly
time
done
with our show. Like, you like it al dente, it's going to be the perfect al dente for you. You like it a little more tender than al dente, buddy, your pasta's coming out perfect no matter what, if you spend enough time.
If you want that, like, school cafeteria mush noodle, fucking, you're going to get it the best you've ever had it.
It's a weird choice, but
it'll do what you want to do. Like, it follows your bliss.
What I'm saying is, it's 2025 and there's nothing better you could be doing than listening to It Gets Weird podcast. And we actually left 2024 with a cliffhanger, which I don't think we've ever done before.
A real Who Shot Mr. Burns situation on the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. But this was Who Shot Mary Pinchot Meyer.
Yeah.
Oh my God, Niall. I was just telling you before we started recording how brain mushy I feel. Honestly, I started to sort of think to myself, like, how I feel after reading all this stuff. And it's almost like I woke up from a nap. Like, once I was like, all right, I'm ready, it's time to record and stuff, it was just like, whew, I just took like a 30-minute nap that, like, didn't really correct my exhaustion, but felt like a little good, but also at the same time kind of felt really bad too. That's kind of how I feel after spending all this time reading about Mary Meyer and James Jesus Angleton. I don't know how else to describe it. But
you took the nap a little too late in the day, and you're gonna be up all night because of it.
Yeah, pretty much.
You're gonna feel weird.
That is the vibe of the story of Mary Meyer, I think. Because last week we discussed the strange details surrounding the murder of Georgetown socialite and artist and JFK side piece, Mary Pinchot Meyer. Honestly, I feel a little bad saying JFK side piece. I obviously say it with a little bit of a smirk because it's a funny, like, phrase in my mind, like it's sort of a word salad, JFK side piece. But Mary Pinchot Meyer was more than a side piece, obviously. She was like And then here's another thing that was weird in researching this episode is like people develop opinions about Meyer and JFK's relationship, like what the nature of that relationship was. Some people like will talk about it like Mary Meyer was like not that interested into JFK, and JFK was like swooning over her and trying really hard. Like I talked about that unsent letter last time, right? And stuff. So lots of speculation around the relationship. I would offer that a lot of accounts from people who Mary Meyer spoke with directly paints it as a more mutual loving relationship than that. But it like so much in this fucking story, it's a lot of back and forth, a lot of rumor, a lot of contradictory accounts. And so I guess when you look at this, these podcast episodes here, it would have made it would have made sense, I think, to subtitle them "The Murder of Mary Meyer," but I decided to call these two episodes "The Wilderness of Mirrors" instead. We're mostly here to focus on the surreal details around the murder of Meyer, but this is also, to me, and the listener at home, the introduction. These two episodes are the introduction to somebody that I'm going to be doing a deep dive on very soon, who we've already discussed, James Jesus Angleton, James Jesus Angleton, JJA, as I like to call him. So the title, Wilderness of Mirrors, actually comes from Angleton, who then claims to have coined the phrase Wilderness of Mirrors. So for Angleton, this metaphor was meant to describe, in his own words, the, quote, myriad of stratagems, deceptions, artifices, and all the other devices of disinformation which the Soviet bloc and its coordinated intelligence services used to confuse and split the West, an ever-fluid landscape where fact and illusion merge. That is what Angleton describes the wilderness of mirrors as. In fact, you can even find an interview, a televised interview with Angleton where he says this stuff. Now, here's the thing. Angleton didn't actually coin the term wilderness of mirrors. He stole it from somebody.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought last episode you said it came from something else, and I was waiting to remember what that was.
Yeah, so if you'll recall, the final boss of Spooks here was actually pretty passionate about poetry, which when we do a dive into him, I'll have a whole lot more to say about his relationship with poetry. But for now, just understand that he made friends with a lot of prominent poets at the time. And one of the nicknames that he would earn when people would research him is the poet Spook. So the Wilderness of Mirrors comes from Eliot's poem, T.S. Eliot's poem, Gerontion, I think is how you pronounce it.
Okay.
And it's sort of telling the story of this old man who is being read to by a child, and he's sort of like musing about the oncoming weather is sort of the impression that I got from reading it. But I wanted to read you a tiny little snippet of it to kind of get the vibe here. So here's from Gerontion by T.S. Eliot. To lose beauty in terror in inquisition. I have lost my passion. Why should I need to keep it, since what is kept must be adulterated? I have lost my sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch. How should I use it for your closer contact? These, with 1,000 small deliberations, protract the profit of their chilled delirium, excite the membrane, when the sense is cooled with pungent sauces, multiply variety in a wilderness of mirrors. What will the spider do? Suspend its operations? Will the weevil delay? De Bilhash, Fresca, Mrs. Camel, whirled beyond the circuit of the shuddering bear and fractured atoms. Gull against the wind in the windy straits of Belle Isle, or running on the horn, white feathers in the snow, the Gulf claims, and an old man driven by the trades to a sleepy corner. Tenants of the house, thoughts of a dry brain in a dry season. Now, it's an interesting poem. It kind of at times almost feels like it describes Angleton. I think that Angleton, God, we don't have time for this. I'll like I said, I'm going to get into the poetry angle more when we actually talk about just Angleton and just his life. But he took this very like literal interpretation of the text of poetry. Like that he was one of those, I forget the name of the movement, but he is involved in this movement that interprets poetry from that sort of perspective. And so his borrowing of the wilderness of mirrors in this poem specifically, I think it's like so many things with Angleton. Is it actually meaningful? Does Angleton know how like that it sort of seems meaningful to his life in retrospect? I don't know, but the poem eerily sort of feels like it's talking about him because of his connection to it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So, I think that he, by the way, Angleton, I think did in fact was friends with T.S. Eliot, if I'm remembering correctly. So, anyways, that's for another episode. But I wanted to set the tone here. Like the line about what will the spider do? One of Angleton's nicknames was the Spider.
Interesting. All right.
So, all that being said, I think Mary Pinchot Meyer's story is a good onboarding for the broader madness that is James Angleton. While he believed this conspiracy about the Soviets and their wilderness of mirror technique thing that he's talking about, this counterintelligence technique that he was so wary of against the U.S., Angleton also was just as much a weaver of secrets, disinformation, illusion, and confusion for the sake of the CIA's own counterintelligence programs. He seems to come into this deep paranoia of the wilderness of mirrors as an enemy tactic, and is also like you could pretty easily argue that he was the most adept adherent of the same tactic in the Western world. So with the context of Angleton here and what he believed was the ultimate threat to the United States and all that, the problem with reading anything about Mary Meyer is just how difficult it becomes to get to the bottom of anything that resembles an absolute truth. There's so many weird moments of obfuscation and just things that seem that they could matter, they don't matter, they end up mattering, but the timeline's weird. It's very confusing. And my experience with reading about this is that let me put it this way to the listener at home. I am learning along with you. I am sort of along with this ride. I still have so much to read and so much to look into with Angleton and all this. And ultimately in these two episodes, I'm really only scratching the surface of a topic that if you want to go look into it, you will find just a crazy amount of detail. And filtering it down to the like weirdest moments and details is what I tried to do. So.
Right. Okay. Yeah, because like it makes sense that her life had so much secrecy with stuff with like when you're having an affair with the president of the United States. I feel like you're going to have a vested interest in not having a lot of record of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And people around you are going to have that vested interest in not keeping a record of what you're doing too. Like it makes sense that a lot of what you're finding is very opinion based over hard fact based, you know?
Yeah. And like, you know, there's so many like the Truetts and the Bradleys, the friends of Mary Meyer and even JFK and Angleton, they will say that, like some of them will say that Mary was confided in by JFK. And there's like there's just all these weird stories that I brought up in the first episode about like Mary and JFK smoking weed in the White House together, and him telling her about concerns about Cuba. I think specifically there were concerns about CIA involvement in Cuba and the relationship they had with basically organized crime. So like, and like, there's the whole, I mean, you know, the whole angle too of, I'm not going to remember her name, but like one of the mistresses of JFK, I believe, was connected to the mob.
Yeah.
So it's shit like that he's talking with Mary Meyer about, presumably, or at least according to certain people who have like talked about this. And then there's people who contradict that too, who are like, yeah, there was nothing in her diary, right? Like, you know,
yeah,
it's ridiculous. So
yeah, we just destroyed it out of procedure, you know?
Right.
There's nothing in it.
We can't find an absolute truth about these stories. And if you're expecting that from listening to this, don't just, I don't know, listen to different episodes of the podcast. Because like, honestly, any episode concerning stuff like this you're just not going to you're not going to ever know the truth, right? No, like I said up front in episode 1, like nobody knows who killed Mary Pinchot Meyer. It is unsolved to this day. Nonetheless, it is abundantly clear that some bizarre, shady shit went down, but we can't draw any definitive conclusion about why shady shit went down due to the whirlwind of rumor and contradictory stories and all the other stuff I just mentioned. So, but the point is, this all seems to kind of point to the introduction of Angleton into Meyer's story, that everything sort of seems to go to shit. So, in spite of all that, let's talk about the details surrounding Meyer's murder, and I want to point out some of the really weird parts.
Great.
So, just a refresher, October 12th, 1964 is when Mary Meyer is killed. She's shot while walking along a towpath in Georgetown, and this is when Henry Wiggins Jr., who was a car mechanic, he's basically called out to work on a car that was just, I guess, abandoned near this towpath. And he's got a partner with him, a mechanic partner with him. And as he I think that within mere moments of arriving on the scene and like getting ready to work on this car, he hears a woman shout, "Someone help me." And then he hears gunshots. He hears 2 gunshots. And so Wiggins runs over and looks down into the like sort of canal and towpath area. And he sees, quote, "a black man in a light jacket, dark slacks, and a dark cap standing over the body of a white woman." And apparently the man who stood over Mary's body stopped, put some object away into his jacket, and looked up right at Wiggins. And this, of course, is fucking scary. So Wiggins ducks behind a wall in fear. He would later say some shit that like, where he was almost like regretful that he did this. And he kind of like talks about how he initially dismissed the sounds that he was hearing down in the towpath as kids playing around. Okay. And he regrets these things, but he ducks behind the wall in fear when this guy looks at him. And a few moments later, Wiggins then looks down. He like peeks out into the canal path again. And this mysterious man, he describes him as walking calmly away. Like the man looked like he was in complete control of the situation, did not seem concerned about what was going on, and just walks away. So what it looks like is that Mary was killed by like a professional.
Yeah, someone planned this hit.
Yes,
sounds like
that's what it sounds like. A couple of details that I want to mention that, like, you know, I realize how much this shit is veering on like true crime territory, and that's not. It's like something that we notoriously have talked shit about before, because we're not a true crime podcast, but bear with me. She is fired at in the back of her head and she doesn't die straight away based on the evidence that they would find. And she would then get a second shot fired directly into her heart. And this is all at point blank. Like in both shots, the gun seems to have been almost up against Mary's body when fired.
Interesting.
They would later get an FBI expert who testified, quote, the dark halos on the skin around both entry wounds suggested they had been fired at close range or possibly point blank. So this is a known fact. Now, we won't get the FBI experts stuff until much later, but Ben Bradley talks about the first time that he had heard of the death of Mary when he had gotten a phone call from a friend of his, Wistar Janney, a friend of his who worked for the CIA. And here is what Ben Bradley says about hearing about Mary's death for the first time. Quote, my friend Wistar Janney called to ask if I had been listening to the radio. It was just after lunch, and of course I had not. Next, he asked if I knew where Mary was, and of course I didn't. Someone had been murdered on the towpath, he said, and from the radio description it sounded like Mary. I raced home. Tony was coping by worrying about children, hers and Mary's, and about her mother, who was 71 years old, living alone in New York. We asked Ann Chamberlain, Mary's college roommate, to go to New York and bring Ruth to us. When Ann was well on her way, I was delegated to break the news to Ruth on the telephone. I can't remember that conversation. I was so scared for her, for my family, and for what was happening to our world. Next, the police told us someone would have to identify Mary's body in the morgue, and since Mary and her husband, Cord Meyer, were separated, I drew that straw too.
Damn.
So you'll recall that Bradley was the guy who was married to Antoinette, and Antoinette was Mary Meyer's sister. Bradley was also the editor at the Washington Post and friends with a lot of CIA people, including former director of Central Intelligence, Richard Helms. Like most people in this story, Bradley was really well connected to the intelligence world, and Bradley also found himself pretty deeply involved with the Post's coverage of the Watergate scandal. He was also involved with the publishing of the Pentagon Papers, which were about investigating the U.S.'s involvement in the Vietnam War. So he's a notable guy. Now, another person who is really important to trying to piece together some of the information around this story is Peter Janney. Now, Peter Janney is the son of Mary Draper Janney, a woman who is also a graduate of Vassar College alongside Mary Meyer and friends of Mary Meyer. And Peter was also friends with Mary's son, Michael. And Janney's personal investigation into Mary Meyer's murder was spurred on by this close relationship to the Meyer family. Peter tends to disagree with a lot of the, let's say, more popular conclusions about Meyer's murder. The like Occam's razors types of people who are like, you know, this was probably just a random act of violence and the guy that they arrest is clearly the guy who killed her or whatever. But Peter Janney is important. He had a close connection. He had family in the CIA, and all this stuff. And he would write a book called Mary's Mosaic, the CIA conspiracy to murder John F. Kennedy, Mary Pinchot Meyer, and their vision for world peace. So he questions Bradley specifically. Bradley is a guy who, we'll get to this, but he flip-flops a lot with his stories about all this. So in the book, Peter Janney says this, quote, how could Bradley's CIA friend have known just after lunch that the murdered woman was Mary Meyer when the victim's identity was still unknown to the police? Did the caller wonder if which by the way, that is true. For the first 24 hours, nobody actually knows who this woman is.
Okay.
Did the caller wonder if the woman was Mary, or did he know it? And if so, how? This distinction is critical, and it goes to the heart of the mystery surrounding Mary Meyer's murder. Now, Janney also even kind of questions whether his father, who was the CIA friend, was the one who actually called Bradley. Wistar Janney, his dad, the CIA friend of Bradley, had died a year before Bradley published his account of the events. Bradley would write in his autobiography, A Good Life, Newspapering, and Other Adventures. He would write about this stuff in that book, and the year before it, Wister Janney had died. So Wister Janney was not around to confirm or deny any of this.
Right. So it could have been a convenient person to tie it to,
yes,
to cover it up. Sure.
Yes.
Okay. I get it.
So yeah, Antoinette Bradley, Mary's sister, apparently received a telephone call from Mary's best friend, Anne Truitt, who was the artist that she had previously shared a space with. I believe at the time that this phone call came, Anne Truitt and her husband were living in Tokyo. And Anne Truitt calls Antoinette and tells her that it was, quote, a matter of some urgency that she found Mary's diary before the police got to it and her private life became a matter of public record. And Mary, I guess, told Anne that, quote, if anything ever happened to me, you need to get my diary, my private diary.
Okay. So she had someone that she had already asked to do that upon her death, which probably led to Mr. Spook coming in and trying to torch it immediately.
Yeah, this is the stuff that led the Bradleys and whatnot to the search for the diary. So Ben Bradley, in his autobiography, says, quote, we didn't start looking until the next morning when Tony and I walked around the corner a few blocks to Mary's house. Tony being Antoinette, I should clarify. It was locked, as we had expected, but when we got inside, we found Jim Angleton, and to our complete surprise, he told us he, too, was looking for Mary's diary. So this is the stuff that I mentioned in the first episode as well. You will, of course, remember these bizarre stories about how the search for the diary happened, how Angleton was already there before the Bradleys were actually there. He was toying with locks and skulking around like a total fucking weirdo. And this
at both her home and her studio, right?
Yes, like they find him inside the home, which was locked, and he tells them, "I'm also looking for the diary because I got the same call." And then they leave, and then they double back, and James Angleton is like fiddling with the lock to the studio when they double back. So he's so fucking blatantly shady, right? Like,
yeah.
It's so funny. And then, like you mentioned, it ends with, at least according to Angleton, his burning of the diary. Regardless of the value of the contents within it. It was like, there's these things that, like, I think Bradley says it, Angleton says it. I think Angleton's children later even say that there was nothing in the diary of note. Nothing about JFK, nothing important in the diary, but we burned it. So that's the weird diary thing. Now, here's another weird side note. In fact, I guess I should say that this entire story is basically weird side notes. So
yeah, because like the main story is she got shot and we don't know who did it.
Yes.
Everything else is fucking context.
Yes. So Anne Truitt's husband was a guy named James Truitt. This is a man who, during World War II, worked for the State Department. And then later, I mentioned this, I think, in the first episode, he worked at Time Life during the early years of the Cold War intrigue. And Time Life, as we have mentioned, was heavily infiltrated and massaged by the CIA, who were using it for a lot of different things, mostly about disseminating, stories that they wanted disseminated. It also had to do with, like, I think getting in contact with emissaries in Europe or some shit. I don't know. But they were in there, right? The CIA was like in Time Life. Which I believe that was Operation Mockingbird stuff.
Right.
So
so is Operation Mockingbird responsible for those like Time Life compilations they used to play fucking infomercials for?
I think that by the time, because it would be in the 70s that like there would be a huge shakeup with the CIA. I always forget the name of this thing, but there's like this commission, this report that basically upends a lot of the CIA's operations and outs a lot of them as well. It's something that we'll get more deeply into when we talk about Angleton, because he has, we even mentioned it in the MK Ultra stuff, because that's, I think, also what called on oh fuck, I'm forgetting his name. The guy who ran MK Ultra and did all the fucked up poison shit. The poisoner in chief. He also would get called upon when he's found out about through this sort of investigation and these reports and the CIA's getting things are getting aired out. And that would happen in the 70s. Which I guess is a weird way to answer your question about whether they were responsible for that. But like, the idea here is that the CIA would change completely after the 70s, supposedly. Supposedly. Lots of people get fired and then get like kind of quietly hired back in certain ways. It's really fun. Like Angleton, again, like not to get too deep into his thing because we're going to cover him, but he would like get fired around this time in the 70s. He'd get released from the CIA and then get quietly rehired as a contractor by the CIA, like after the fact. So it's like,
God, the parallels of the practices of the WWE and the CIA are interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, James Truitt. The Truitts were kindred spirits and close friends with the Meyers and Angletons. They all shared an interest in the arts. They played in the same social circles. So these people are all friends. And the Truitts were also some of the closest confidants of Mary Myers about her romantic relationship with JFK. Like, they would be some of the ones who would come out and talk about this stuff and what Mary Meyer supposedly confided in them. Now, James Truitt was also a journalist working at the Washington Post later in life, alongside Ben Bradlee. And there's this dark, weird ending to all this. So James was one of the folks interviewed on and off about the murder of Mary Meyer, given his close relationship that I mentioned. But he was interviewed by the National Enquirer, where I believe a number of details about Mary and JFK's relationship actually broke in the National Enquirer. So the Enquirer actually sent a journalist to interview Bradlee about Truitt and about the stuff that Truitt was talking about. And one eyewitness, who I actually can't identify, claims that Bradlee, quote, erupted in a shouting rage and had the reporter thrown out of the building. And one of the... So Nina Burleigh, who is an author of a book on Mary Meyer titled A Very Private Woman, says that Watergate was the motivation for Truitt to give this interview about Mary Meyer and JFK. She says here, quote, Truitt was disgusted that Bradlee was getting credit as a great champion of the First Amendment for exposing Nixon's steamy side in Watergate coverage after having indulgently overlooked Kennedy's hypocrisies. So the idea here is that he's like, supposedly Truitt was not stoked about Bradlee getting all this credit with the Watergate controversy stuff, because like I mentioned, Bradlee was heavily involved in that. And of course, there was all this shit about Kennedy that was kind of not coming out until later, and for others was sort of like an open secret. So it's weird drama stuff between these two journalists. And Bradlee would, for many years, only really ever deny many of these stories and controversies surrounding all this. Some believe that Bradlee's especially heated response to everything might come from the fact that he may have been willingly involved in the CIA's Operation Mockingbird. I mean, given everything that I just said about him, and you know, how deep the CIA was in on some of these places, it's possible that Mary's diary could have had information on Operation Mockingbird in it. But this is purely speculation. Bradlee would often change his stories about the Meyer case throughout his life, and after Operation Mockingbird became public knowledge, it also became known that the CIA would also often channel disinformation through their contacts at publications like Time Life. So, like, was Bradlee one of those contacts? We don't know. If there's information about him being an actual contact in that way, I would love to know it, but all I know is that he was friends with people at the CIA. So, and he also was very weird in the fallout of Mary Meyer's death. Like, I don't know.
It's all very nebulous.
Yes. So, here's the dark ending I promised you. Truett would end up getting fired from the Post by Bradley in 1969, and Bradley would basically say that Truett was mentally incompetent. He had declining mental health, and so he had to be let go. And I think at that point, Bradley was like vice president of the Post. So Bradley kicks him out, and Truett's marriage, like within 2 years of getting kicked out of the Post, would just fall apart. And he would end up in the throes of what seemed to be a bit of a mental breakdown. And Truett would end up moving to Mexico, where he would start growing peyote. And then 10 years later, in 1981, after all of that shit, he shoots himself in the head and dies.
Wow. Okay. So that does have an interesting third act for him. All right.
Yeah. Weird, fucked up story for that guy. So, to further complicate things, James Angleton later claimed that he also received, like I said, that phone call from Ann Truett. And then his wife, Cicely Angleton, would then confirm this in an interview given to Nina Burleigh, the woman I just mentioned who wrote the other book. And like I told you up front, like there's all these people batting heads who are writing about Mary Meyer and calling each other's stories bullshit. Nina Burleigh was one of the people who will contradict a thing I'll bring up later, or at least claim a thing is bullshit later.
Okay.
But the point here is Angleton, the man who is responsible for, the man whose whole thing is the Wilderness of Mirrors, like counterintelligence strategy, his wife confirms that this story is definitely true, that Angleton got a phone call from Ann Truett about Mary's diary. It's definitely true because his wife confirmed it in this interview.
Interesting. Okay.
But then there's an article in the New Times from July 9th, 1976, that gives another further different version of events, with Angleton arriving at Mary's house and supposedly being there the night of her murder because they had been invited to a poetry reading that she was supposedly going to do, and that at that point Angleton did not know she was dead. That's another alternative version of the story.
Okay.
So again, not only is it a different things are playing out differently in this other article from the New Times in 1976. It's playing out differently, but if this story is true at all, then he would not have known that she was dead, even though he himself would insist and his wife would insist that he had received the call from Ann Truett confirming her death.
Huh.
You see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
So we don't, who fucking knows? Who fucking knows? I'm kind of on the side of he did hear about her death, but maybe not from Ann Truett. Or because like another alternative angle to this is that Angleton twisted Truett's arm to give the phone call. Because then there's the other questions of how did she know about it?
Right, because that does seem a bit like a someone creating an alibi, you know?
Yes, it's super fucking weird and confusing. And I have to apologize for the listeners at home for how confusing this is. If you think you're confused, I have been just only confused in reading this story, basically. So, I have a snippet here from a book called The Secret History of the CIA by investigative reporter Joseph Trento that also embellishes on this. So it says here, quote, Cicely Angleton called her husband at work to ask him to check on a radio report she had heard that a woman had been shot to death along the old Chesapeake and Ohio towpath in Georgetown. Walking along that towpath, which ran near her home, was Mary Meyer's favorite exercise, and Cicely, knowing her routine, was worried. James Angleton dismissed his wife's worry, pointing out that there was no reason to suppose the dead woman was Mary. Many people walked along the towpath. When the Angletons arrived at Mary Meyer's house that evening, she was not home. A phone call to her answering service proved that Cicely's anxiety had not been misplaced. Their friend had been murdered that afternoon. So, conflicting reports here from a lot of different sources.
Yeah.
Flashback to the first moments of Mary's murder. Like I mentioned, there is the mechanic, Henry Wiggins Jr., who witnessed the man who murdered Mary Meyer, and he had been called out to service a vehicle. It was moments after arriving to pick up this vehicle that Wiggins heard the shots that killed Mary, like I mentioned. But I want to talk for just a second here, because this vehicle was a sedan. I want to talk about this car. I mentioned in episode 1
that it disappeared soon after.
Yes, it had been marked as abandoned. So I think the idea here was that maybe they were going to tow it in to do work on it. And a ticket had been made with information about the make and model, who called it in and stuff, because they had been called in to go check out this car. And, other relevant information for the mechanics. So I want to reiterate, somewhere amid the scuffle of police activity, like a few hours later, after Wiggins is being sort of taken by the police to answer questions, and they actually end up arresting somebody, which we'll get to momentarily, somewhere in that scuffle, the sedan would disappear completely. And the ticket that was documenting all the stuff I just mentioned back in, I think, the mechanic's office also just completely disappeared. Just gone. Both things are gone. We have no information. It's also important to note here that Wiggins was himself a black man, and the man that he had seen standing over Mary was also a black man. And the police quickly put out an APB based on Wiggins' description. Now, that being said, there's some notes that I saw where Wiggins is like irritated with how long the investigation is taking in the moments after Mary's death. Like he doesn't say that they like drag their feet, but the way he talks about it makes it sound like he kind of feels like they are, maybe. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But that's, I don't even know what to do with that. But they put out this APB, and not long after, one of the policemen searching the area along the canal towpath discovers a man named Ray Crump Jr. Crump is a black man, and he, at the time when they found him, was wearing a yellow sweatshirt and jeans, and he was also soaked to the bone with water. And Crump's story was that he had been fishing and slipped on some rocks and fell into the canal water. Police would say that they were suspicious that Crump had been drinking, and they also found that Crump's fly was unzipped, and that the man seemed fairly disoriented, and he had a few cuts and bruises, which he would pretty quickly explain were from falling from the rocks. Now, again, this is another part where you could, if you want to read about the details of this story, you can go and find all the weird details and the timeline of when things are said and when police take note of this or that, because a lot of it is just sort of weird and so this is me trying to distill it. Here is the big problem with them arresting Crump. Crump doesn't really resemble the man that had been described by Wiggins. The detectives on the scene would even later admit that they had been too hasty in their arrest of Crump. And then, not to mention the element of racism that was definitely at play here. It's a black man accusing another black man of murder, and not to mention the murder of a wealthy white socialite. So this all seems like an open and shut case to the cops, I guess. And people just sort of are like, this is going to be an easy one. It's obvious, right?
Yeah.
But the clothes don't really match. Not really, anyway. And Crump is multiple inches shorter than, and somewhere around 50 pounds lighter than what Wiggins had estimated the killer being. And the investigation would also never find any of Mary's blood or DNA on Crump, and they could find no evidence that Crump had fired a gun on that day, which is apparently a thing that you can test for, which I didn't know.
Yeah, gunshot residue.
That's crazy.
It leaves like residue on your hand when you fire a gun. Yeah.
Well, the thing when you start reading about the details about the police investigation and what the detectives find and all this, you find that from all these different accounts that there's just as much stuff that goes in Crump's favor as there is stuff that makes him look really bad. I'll just give you an example because like it's kind of a rabbit hole, but I almost said wormhole. His falling in the water would actually basically eliminate the possibility of getting a decent result from the gun firing test that forensics could take. So they basically just don't do it. They're like, he was in water after the murder. You can't actually test for this now. Then for another, Crump also wore 2-inch platform shoes. He was a very short guy, about 5'3", but the man Wiggins had described was somewhere around 5'8" to maybe 5'10". And then the police report does not tell whether or not he had the platform shoes on when they when they're like questioning him and all this other stuff. And the police, furthermore, I would just point out that 2-inch platforms don't get you to 5'8" to 5'10". So,
no, like that you're still less than halfway there.
Yes.
Like you gotta you need like fucking 5-inch. You need Tom Cruise's Apple box to get you there. You know?
Yeah. Plus there's the just pretty big discrepancy between estimated weight. The police were severely lacking in evidence for booking Crump, but despite everything I just said, they went by his height and weight as the main reasons for taking him in, even though on its face, none of that really makes sense. Details continue to get weirder. So at around 1 p.m., Crump is already in custody when an unidentified man patches into the police radio frequency telling a river patrol team that they need to be on the lookout for a light-colored jacket. Within minutes of receiving this bit of info from a person who is never identified in any report, they find the exact jacket that this person claims they should be looking for, and it matches the description that Wiggins gives. So they find it. They find it, and it's brought in as more evidence against Crump. Which, again, the evidence was really sparse up until they have this jacket.
And the jacket isn't directly tied to him in any way, shape, or form. It was just found in the same river that he supposedly fell into, right?
And I think that he later, when he's pressed about the jacket, says that he lost it when he fell into the river. But I would also kind of throw out there that, like, all the stories about them grilling Crump, and according to his attorney, who's going to come into play here momentarily, the man was meek, and like a lot of the times that they're pressing him, he's sobbing. He just seems not. A lot of the reports make him sound not like the kind of guy to murder, but also that like he could cave under the pressure of the interrogation that he was receiving.
Yeah. Coercion is not out of the question here.
Yeah, and like it's not out of the question, but it's also not officially on the record, right? This jacket is taken as official evidence because he does. I do believe he actually says like, oh, I lost the jacket when I fell into the river. But again, this is all on the hint of an unidentified man who tells the police to look for it. Now, again, it should be noted that Crump just has no motivation for this murder. Meyer was not sexually assaulted or robbed. So if this truly was just some random act of violence, then it had to just be that. It was just like random and without motive. And that's why Crump kills her. Just for no reason. He has a penchant for murderous rage or something. It's impossible. I don't know.
Yeah. Sure.
Now, another weird detail, when the police began investigating the area surrounding the murder scene, they saw very few people. And the few people who were noted in the area, in the police reports, they were never stopped and questioned or even identified. So in them looking around and eventually coming on Crump, they note multiple people down like the path and stuff, but they never stopped those people. I think one of them was like a white couple, you know? And again, we just have to think about how racistly this was probably going down. So they never question anybody, and no gun is ever found. They never find a murder weapon, nothing linking him to a murder weapon, nothing. And again, this is also based on the evidence found around her body and stuff, and how the confrontation between Mary and her killer seemed to have gone down. It looked like it was done by a professional, which Crump was not.
Right.
So Crump would be swiftly indicted with no preliminary hearing, which I don't think you're supposed to do.
Yeah, that doesn't sound correct.
The FBI would also compile a crime report on the murderer and Crump, but this was withheld from the defense during the trial. It was only years later that Peter Janney would publish this report, in which the FBI found no forensic evidence linking Crump to the murder of Mary Meyer whatsoever. Nothing. They had nothing. The trial of Ray Crump Jr. began on July 19th, 1965, and Dovey Roundtree, civil rights activist and attorney, she would end up taking Crump's case, and she seemed to truly believe that he was innocent, and she decided to defend him pro bono. One of the first things that Roundtree notes about the trial was that it seemed completely impossible to find any information about who Mary Meyer was. And whenever she would try to look into information about Mary Meyer, a wall would pop up blocking her. Anytime she tried to learn anything about Mary. The judge presiding over the trial, Howard Cochran, who was another man who was friends with important people at the CIA, he ruled before the trial even began that Meyer's private life was not allowed to be discussed during the trial at all. And Dovetree would later say that it felt that, quote, it was as if Mary Meyer existed only on the towpath on the day she was murdered. It was as if Mary Meyer only existed as a murder victim with no life outside of being murdered.
Wow. Okay. So they, like, do we know why that was the ruling? Like, why that was the thing?
I think that there's probably a justification, but I guess the idea is like to prevent. I don't know. I just know that it happened.
It feels like preventing embarrassment to the
right. Exactly. Like, but at
presidency,
at the same time, who she is seems kind of important. To the trial, right? Like. But it's not allowed. Not allowed to do it. Can't talk about her personal life. The murder victim, she has no personal life. She just was killed by somebody, and that's what we're here to talk about. So things get fucking weirder again. The morning after the murder, with sparse evidence to lock Ray Crump away, out of nowhere, somebody shows up to boost the case against Ray Crump. So one of the detectives was delivering evidence to the FBI crime lab when a U.S. Army lieutenant calling himself William L. Mitchell shows up at police headquarters, and he introduces himself to the homicide squad, and he says that he had read about this woman's murder that morning, and that he believes that he may have passed her while running on the towpath the day before, and kind of gives like a description and says, oh, is this what Mary Meyer looked like? Was this what she was wearing? And Mitchell says that he was stationed nearby at the Pentagon, but during lunchtime he would go on runs on the same path as Mary Meyer. And Mitchell, so this is according to the police, this guy, quote, described in detail the clothes worn by Mrs. Meyer and that she was crossing the narrow wooden footbridge walking west away from Keybridge when he had come to a complete stop to allow her to cross before him. Now, he says that 200 yards after that, Mitchell had passed a black man wearing a dark cap and a light-colored windbreaker jacket with dark trousers and dark shoes. The exact description from Wiggins, who saw this murderer. Mm-hmm. And so Mitchell shows up and is considered a boost to basically say, well, it's Ray Crump. He did it. And he's like basically a witness in the trial who wants to identify Ray Crump as the murderer that he saw that night. There's contradictions in his account though. So like there's details when he actually explains everything that go unexplained. The police don't seem interested in investigating the sort of lack of certain details. There's, people who have put research into this basically say that like, could he have actually run that distance in the time that he says? And how, like, basically there's this, if you take him, everything that he says, all the details of what he said, he would have had to have been running, to like actually like really fucking booking it to get to the places that he was supposed to be in.
Sprint.
Yeah.
Okay.
So from Mary's Mosaic, I have here a quote that says this: "No one ever questioned who Lieutenant William L. Mitchell actually was or what he was doing on the morning of October 12th, 1964. Instead, everyone, the police, the media, the entire city, took Mitchell at his word, yet no one has ever corroborated Mitchell's presence on the towpath the day of Mary Meyer's murder. Truthfully, there is no certainty Mitchell was actually there that day because his entire story is unsupported by anyone other than himself." So they take Mitchell's accusations and claims at face value. Now, to make matters even fucking weirder, Janney looks into Mitchell. Peter Janney looks into Mitchell because there's all this stuff that doesn't add up at the time of the trial and all that. But he also is like, there's a news clip that Janney finds where he basically discovers that by the time the trial had begun, Mitchell was actually no longer in the military. In fact, he was supposedly, according to this news clip, serving as a math instructor at Georgetown University. And as Janney kind of looks into this lead, he discovers that Georgetown actually has no record of Mitchell having taught there ever. Now, again, Georgetown University is asserted as being a place that the CIA would sometimes use as a cover.
Right.
And so he looks into the address that Mitchell gives to the police and the folks at the trial. And when he looks into the address, it supposedly goes back to a building that had been used as a CIA safe house in the past. So he's not a Georgetown math instructor. He may be linked to a CIA safe house, and nobody after this point is really able to locate Mitchell. The man at a certain point just kind of up and disappears. Now,
interesting.
We don't, again, there's so much that I don't know who this guy is. I couldn't really look into it. And most of the people who look into this are saying, we don't know who he is. He had some connections to the CIA. He didn't actually teach at Georgetown. We think he's a CIA agent, maybe, possibly. But we can't prove anything because he's gone.
Yeah, he doesn't exist anymore. Okay. All right.
So through the work of Dovetree poking holes in the case until it's basically Swiss cheese, because that's how it goes down, by the way. Like, again, you can look into the details of this, but she tears it apart. Ray Crump ends up being acquitted of the murder. and the case remains unsolved to this day. So Ray Crump gets off. There's a whole the lady that I mentioned, whose name give me a second, Nina Burleigh, who wrote the book A Very Private Woman, about Mary Meyer. She would like basically say in her account of Mary Meyer that she believes Ray Crump was the one who did it, because after he gets acquitted, Ray Crump would basically have a life of various crimes. He would, I think, also end up going back to jail for other unrelated reasons. There's speculation from the counter to that like he got fucking ruined when he spent time in jail.
Okay.
And then you want to look at the even more sort of like paranoid version of that. People also will tell you that spooks got to him, which you can't say anything definitive about that. He like ends up like committing arson. It's a weird trail, but Nina Burleigh takes his like not history, but like his after the fact like life, that he would become this criminal, this serial criminal, as proof that he did it. I think that's a little bit of a stretch.
Sure.
But like Nina Burleigh's account is she believes that he did it. Lots of other people don't agree with that. And of course, like I said, he was acquitted, so the state officially says he didn't do it.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, I wanna end this on one of the other really weird things that just proves nothing and further complicates things. So you'll remember Cord Meyer.
Yeah.
Who was Mary's former husband. They get divorced. I talked about it in part 1. He's also got CIA deep connections. He worked at the CIA. He may have been deeply involved on certain projects, including, I think, Operation Mockingbird. I think that's what it was. I talk about it in part 1, so if you'll know what I'm talking about if you've heard that. He would end up leaving the CIA in 1977. And then in 1982, in his autobiography, he would write, quote, "I was satisfied by the conclusions of the police investigation that Mary had been the victim of a sexually motivated assault by a single individual and that she had been killed in her struggle to escape." So that's him writing in 1982, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Well, there's a book called The Georgetown Ladies Social Club that was published in 2003, written by a writer named C. David Hyman. Hyman recounts an interview that he got with Cord Meyer while Cord was on his deathbed. So here's a little snippet that I got.
I love a good deathbed interview.
Well, I love it
Tell
too,
all
because the
your secrets.
idea here is that he's going to just give up secrets because he doesn't give a fuck anymore, and all his CIA buddies are gone. Who gives a shit? I'm dying. Like, I think that this interview comes within weeks of his death. Hyman talks to the guy, and here's what the snippet says. It says, quote, "Asked to comment on the case by the author, Cord Meyer held court at the beginning of February 2001, 6 weeks before his death, in the barren dining room of a Washington nursing home. Propped up in a chair, his glass eye bulging, he struggled to hold his head aloft. Although he was no longer able to read, the nurses supplied him with a daily copy of the Washington Post, which he carried with him wherever he went. 'My father died of a heart attack the same year Mary was killed,' he whispered. 'It was a bad time.' And when Hyman asks him about how he felt about the death of Mary Meyer, about who killed her, Cord Meyer says, quote, 'The same sons of bitches that killed John F. Kennedy.'"
Wow. All right. So not saying who they are, but saying it's the same people. So you then get to play the what camp of JFK conspiracy do you fall into? Was it the mob? Was it the government? Was it the Russians?
Was it the CIA?
An actor? Was it the CIA? Yeah.
Yeah. As for Angleton's part in this, the point that I kind of wanted to tease out is that the more he gets involved, the more and more stories and rumors begin to come out that conflict and mystify, and they spread. Like I said, with the Truitts and the Bradleys. Like I said, Angleton's own children would offer up alternate versions of these stories. And all of this shit contradicts each other. It is basically impossible to say what happened here. Now, I got to give a couple shouts out to some sources here. I mentioned Wilderness of Mirrors by David Martin. I have that right here in my hands.
There it is. Oh, that's an old.
It's an old book.
Like.
Yeah. I also I have another book on Angleton specifically on the way right now. So this is all the lead up to an episode or potentially a series of episodes about the man himself, because he is involved in so much shit. But I think that the death of Mary Meyer exemplifies his vibe, because at the end of the day, either something truly shady happened and somebody killed Mary to shut her up, to get her out of the picture because of what she knew, which is the conspiracy angle, or nothing actually really happened and Mary's death was just a tragic random attack. It is entirely within the realm of possibility, knowing James Angleton and how he operated, that if it was a random attack that had no significance whatsoever, he still intervened to make things fucked.
Yeah, you still obfuscate it so that no one knows for sure, and that way it's adds to the mystery in the world of mirrors.
It is layers and layers of confusion and misinformation and confessions and false confessions and truth and falsehoods all thrown out there to completely ruin the possibility of knowing what happened. So I have Wilderness of Mirrors by David Martin that I'm almost done reading right now. I have another book on its way that wasn't used for this episode, but we'll get to that. I also tapped into Mary's Mosaic by Peter Janney and all the aforementioned articles from various places. But I have to give a huge shout out. I know nobody involved with this knows about us, but I have to give a huge shout out to Ghost Stories for the End of the World, who I have shouted out on this show many times before. Anytime I look into this particular vein of conspiracy stuff, there's usually a really, really well done episode by Ghost Stories. So I have to give them credit because they filled in some gaps for me and stuff here when I listened to their episode. It's episode 24, James Angleton and the Wilderness of Mirrors, if anybody wants to listen to it. They also kind of come up with, they offer the framing of, let's talk about James Angleton and his ideas in the context of the murder of Mary Pinchot Meyer, because it works to kind of exemplify his whole shtick.
Yeah, it's kind of it very succinctly shows you what his philosophy was, it seems like.
Yeah. So I don't like I don't like promoting other podcasts on my show, but I'm going to go ahead and say Ghost Stories for the End of the World is one of the good ones. So
sure. The couple episodes I've listened to have been good.
So I hope that didn't feel dissatisfying, because I realized that I didn't answer anything. I just gave you a bunch of weird shit that makes no sense.
I mean, I think you're overinflating the amount of objective truth we deal with on this podcast. So much of what we do is like, here's stories from people that we don't know if we can trust about this thing that happened. And that's all this was. Like, it's very in the vein.
That's true, but I feel what makes me feel extra insane with this story is that you can sort of feel the hand of somebody. You can almost feel the hand of somebody like causing problems. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. There's definitely some interlopers for sure.
It's fucking weird. It's a weird story. And I gotta admit, just like personally, I've become very fascinated with Angleton, because we'll talk about him very soon. He is such a strange and like I almost want to link him to the perception people have of conspiracies to this day. The man himself was a conspiracy theorist, driven to like wild paranoia about the KGB and like communist spies and stuff. And I don't know, he feels like the blueprint for shit that would just come later. You know what I mean? So I don't know. That is The Wilderness of Mirrors, Mary Pinchot Meyer, and James Angleton.
Fantastic. I had no idea. So this was a very interesting dive.
So that leads us to the big question, Niall.
Right.
And I talked a lot and didn't give you a lot of room to crack jokes, I realized, because I stuffed so much crap into this episode. So now's your chance, okay?
All right. Let me get my shtick out.
Niall, if you were murdered, what rumor could somebody spread about you that would throw people off the trail of finding your killer forever? It's a weird question, I realize, but it gets weird.
Yeah, very conceptual.
I have a tendency to do that.
Yeah. So first of all, I have to put myself in a world where I was murdered and they're covering something up. Okay. Do you have something?
I do. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I think if people started spreading the story and getting the story to become a part of an official narrative about my murder, that I actually wasn't into Neon Genesis Evangelion, the anime, it would fuck everything up. Because of how much of, we're doing a podcast talking about Ava right now, where I get to spout off all this nerdy crap that I know about it. It would kind of leave people questioning, well, like, why did he know about that? Why did he go into so much detail and research of that if he never truly enjoyed it? If it was not a thing that he was into?
Yeah, that would be concerning, I guess. For
people. It would maybe call into question some things about my mental health and things like that, and who I truly was. I would start to look like maybe I was some secret. I don't know.
Yeah. What else? What else were you hiding?
What else was I hiding?
If that was such a big front. Yeah. Interesting. I was thinking like I think that I would want to be the thing that I would want to see happen is I want to bring the missing 411 phenomenon into the city. And so I want to I think that the stuff you would do is create kind of the markers of missing 411 but correlate them to a city environment. Okay. So instead of running water, it's near a fire hydrant.
I see.
Or instead of berries and stuff, it's you buy a convenience store.
Yeah, you're near a bodega.
So I think that I would want, because I feel like it's better to not just obfuscate my own disappearance / murder, but set up a framework to do so for others. You know, and so I think bringing missing 411 to the city is a good way to do that.
What are some other things that could be missing 411 like points that you could point to as being a pattern? Because in the missing 411 stuff, it was if there's a berry bush nearby, if there's running water nearby, what are some things in the city? You mentioned a convenience store. Maybe I'm trying to think of something more specific. I don't live in a very big city, so I'm having trouble.
Hearing church bells, church bells are a
church
sign
bells ring thrice.
Yeah, there you go.
Near where the person was murdered or disappeared.
I think that's good.
An unidentified flash of light, perhaps, if it's at night.
Yeah,
there's always these conditions too, where it's if it's at this time or if it's in this location, then this.
That's always a two-step process.
It's true. Okay. All right. So a city, a city-based missing 411 catalog, a framework, as you said, for people who want to disappear and pretend they've been murdered. I respect that.
Yeah, I know that that's probably a pretty niche thing that, you know, people want to like fake their murders in a city, but I think they deserve a framework. So
thank you. I agree. I don't know why I said thank you. Well,
because you're a person that wants to disappear in a city. This is all a front. Yeah. We're obfuscating it again.
This is a long con podcast that's all leading to me faking my death. So that's going to be fun. Look forward to that. I think we made
that joke pretty regularly, like that one of us is faking our death. Usually you.
Yeah, faking our deaths.
We're
you know, we've been bought by the FBI or the CIA, the Men in Black. Who knows? It's all possible. I mean, I just like putting stuff like that out there so that people never really know the truth about us, you know? Mm-hmm. We're not actually invested in or enjoy any of these stories. We just are, you know, a CIA operation, a PSYOP.
We're all about the wilderness of mirrors, and we're just trying to confuse you.
It's true. Well, it's 2025. Glad I kicked it off with an episode that's not very funny. I'm really going against my previous assertion that my New Year's resolution was to be funnier.
Yeah,
I've already fucked that one up. No, I think this is such a fascinating story, and I can't wait to have 2 or 3 part episode about James Angleton where we get maybe 2 or 3 chuckles. So it'll be nice.
No, I think James Angleton's going to be a real fucking
he's so
slapper.
weird.
I think that'll be good.
He's so weird that there will be some stuff that's kind of funny, and then there will be stuff that makes you scratch your head so hard you put a hole in it. So yeah. That is the Wilderness of Mirrors. It's an intro to James Angleton. I can't wait to talk about him. It'll be fun. So, yeah. All that being said, are you ready to take care of some business?
Yeah. So if you want to follow us on social media, we're on Twitter at IGW Podcast.
You can follow us on Facebook.com/ItGetsWeirdPodcast.
And if you listen to podcasts, look up It Gets Weird wherever you follow your podcasts, and we should be sitting right there next to everything else you want to listen to, because podcasts are wonderful.
And we're also on Blue Sky, bsky.app. You know, we're under the name at It Gets Weird. So give us a follow on there. We're trying to use Twitter less, but Blue Sky, the tide seems to be turning maybe a little bit. We'll see. So check us out on Blue Sky. We also have Twitch, twitch.tv/itgetsweird, where I stream video games with friends sometimes. Colin, friend of the show, Colin, we have been playing some Elden Ring on there, so give us a follow. That's been a lot of fun. Email us, itgetsweirdpodcast@gmail.com. It's a new year. We need fresh new emails to munch on, fresh new stories from people. I would love to hear some more stories. I'd also, you know, if you want to give us your thoughts on the 2024 veering into the parapolitical and the exopolitical, please let us know. I'm curious if people have more info. Also, if you have found that I missed something important, please let me know. I would love to know. It was really, I'll be honest with you listening out there, really hard to do this one. This one was hard. It was confusing. So please give us an email. Just let us know how we should address you. And we may read it out on the show if it's good. Now, the most important thing of all, you got to check out patreon.com/itgetsweird. You gotta. It's the perfect New Year's gift to go and get some bonus content out on our Patreon. We have a $1 tier. It's just a tip. It's just a, hey, thanks for doing what you do. Here's $1. But we do have a $2 tier. And at the $2 tier, you're going to get It Gets Weird TV that comes out every other week. It Gets Weird TV. Right now, we're discussing Neon Genesis Evangelion. We talk about weird television there. People get to vote on what weird TV we watch whenever we pull up a new season. So please check it out at the $2 tier. But if you want even more bang for your buck, for the $5 tier is where it's at. You get another show in the off week of It Gets Weird TV called World of Weird, where Niall and I kind of talk about cutting room floor type shit, tangents and all kinds of stuff. Basically, whatever's on our mind, you get to hear us talk about it on World of Weird. We just hit 10 episodes of that, and it's been a lot of fun. So please donate at the $5 tier. You'll get that show plus the back catalog of It Gets Weird TV and everything else that we put up on the Patreon. You'll also get access to the main feed 2 days early on Friday instead of Sunday, and you will get access to a Discord where we're hanging out chatting with our listeners. If you don't get an invite to the Discord, please contact us through Patreon. Let us know. I'll hook you up. But nonetheless, need you to donate to that Patreon. We don't advertise the show. It's all word of mouth, and it's all you people, coming in and donating to the Patreon, which we appreciate immensely. So thank you all. You're the reason the show's still going to this day. But we could always use more.
Yeah.
Now, if you can't donate, please tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your congressman all about It Gets Weird podcast.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for continuing to support the show in a brand new year. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. Happy 2025, everybody. We're going to get crazy this year. Shit's about to hit the fan at this podcast.
All right. Thank you all for listening. This has been It Gets Weird, and I've been Niall.
And I'm Kyle, signing out.
Peace.